Eventually, the county chairman stood up and went to the microphone, and he said, "One day I was sitting in my office and the county development officer walked in and said, 'There's some people down in Tampa who want to buy part of our industrial park.' He said, 'Great, what do they want to do with it?' She said, I don't know, but I think they want to blow up houses." The county chairman said, "You listen to me. You get on the phone with those people and you tell them no way in hell they're blowing up houses in our industrial park." The development officer said, "Okay, but I think they want to buy the whole place and put up a $40 million building." The county chairman replied, "I said, you listen to me. You get on the phone with those people and you tell them, 'Welcome to Chester County.'"
Before the research center was built, IBHS was known in the insurance industry, and that was about it. What the research center does, it gives us the ability to open conversations with all of the other stakeholders, the construction industry, contractors, vendors, modelers, other allied organizations, public policymakers, the media, consumers. It is so powerful that it allows us to go into a room and be taken seriously. It is so powerful that we can sit at any conference table, any witness table, and have something substantive to say, and people will listen. And as a result, it has really expanded and elevated the profile and the footprint, not just of the research center and IBHS, but of the insurance industry in the resilience movement.
Over the last 2 decades, I've been in roles where I've traveled out after disasters. I've walked through the homes of survivors. I've been there after tornadoes, after big floods and hurricanes, and I've seen the damage that plays in each individual home. I've always talked about that in terms of the importance of knowing who the survivor is, understanding the real people that are at the other side of that.
After Hurricane Andrew in 1992, communities were shocked at the widespread damage. Dr. Tim Reinhold believed it was a wake-up call for many in terms of code development and property loss.
For me, the smoke screen and the smoke that was flying around and all people pointing at everybody else really made it crystal clear in my mind that we needed an ability to recreate those kind of storm conditions in a realistic fashion. And so I actually got some money from IBHS and from State Farm at that time to begin looking at the possibility of creating a big facility.
The main thing I remember about Tim during the first, I would say, couple of years before we broke ground was that he was constantly working on problems, because no one had ever built a facility like this before. We obviously wanted it to work. And I think about all the times we were having a meal together because we were on the road looking at property, or we were meeting with people, and he inevitably had either a notepad or a cocktail napkin and a pencil in his hand, drawing solutions, figuring things out. I think at one point we figured there were like 1,000 cocktail napkins had died in service to the creation of the lab.
Yeah, problem solving and has been, sort of a life habit for me.
Those in the insurance industry were also becoming increasingly aware of the need for change.
And I remember in 2004 saying to some investigators, in fact, having conversations with Dr. Tim Reinhold, and we all agreed. We're seeing the aftermath of something that's much more complex than we know. We need to understand this better. We need to see the mechanisms of damage rather than just the aftermath of damage. And so I think out of those types of conversations that basically the industry was trying to have, we got this momentum towards doing something full scale.
When you start talking about going to full scale, you got to build the building, you got to get it in the right place for the testing, or you got to build it where you're going to test, which then locks up for that whole construction sequence your facility. So there are a lot of challenges that come when you go to full scale. You got instruments that are running all over the place, you got cables all over the place. It's a much bigger challenge from manpower, from instrumentation standpoint. We could hose up and model the high-rise building in a couple hours to run a test. That doesn't happen in days in a full-scale building.
Why is it important to test at full scale? Because the physical properties of some of the materials that are used in construction change if they're shrunk down. We knew that the lab was going to revolve around wind. That was the underlying piece to everything. But then we wanted to add other hazards, so we had a series of charrettes actually with member companies. And American Family came to the table and said, you got to do hail. And we're like, yeah, we got to do hail. And CSAA and the autos came to us and said, you got to do wildfire. We're like, yeah, we got to do wildfire. And we knew we needed to do wind-driven rain. A lot of the New England companies were asking about winter weather. And it was just interesting to see the dynamic among these very differently situated companies. USAA, who is in all 50 states, Amica, who's in a group of states, auto owners, EMC, Zura. I mean, there was just this mix of commercial and residential and geography that got us, I think, to the best possible mix for what would have a true impact on our company's bottom lines.
It sort of snowballed in a way, in that we started to realize that we needed to build a lab that could answer most of the questions that were pre-existing about these catastrophic perils for our industry. And that's essentially why we focused on number one, full scale, number two, focusing on the critical perils that are driving losses today, and really would, with results that would be meaningful to consumers.
While the pieces of what the research center would become were falling into place, the question remained, where exactly was this place?
So I remember the first time I came up to South Carolina, because I came from Florida up here to South Carolina. Came and looked around and was like, wow, there's a lot of room out here. And turns out that the county has set aside this area as the potential for economic development. And we were one of their first customers.
From the perspective of South Carolina wind, we're extremely pleased to have the lab in our state. When we were experiencing difficulties with coastal property insurance, many consumers often said, somebody needs to do something. Well, that somebody is IBHS.
Creating realistic wind conditions in a controlled environment was not going to be an easy task.
We began to find out that actually with electric fans, you could speed them up and slow them down enough to create a gust structure that was pretty reasonable. And it meant going to lots of smaller fans, which was the economical way to do it. But when you're starting to talk to people about, well, I'm going to have 105 fans going at the same time, their kind of eyes are glazed. You go over and go, you're going to keep that many of them going? Because initially we were looking at other power sources, but when we found electric motors could do it, the reliability is there, and it made everything much more possible.
AME came up with a methodology. They built this basket that was like a trailer. A single fan would go in, they would pick it up with a crane, and they had a method of tilting it so that they could roll the fan out and lock it down. And they had to do that 105 times. And I snapped a picture with my phone of the last fan going into the fan cells, and that was really cool. I have that picture in my office today.
Having a brand new laboratory meant a blank canvas for IBHS and the industry. It quickly became the ideal space to work on unanswered questions lingering from post-disaster investigations in the field.
I think the biggest questions in my mind were about wind, understanding why structures were failing so easily in wind, and how we could economically improve existing inventory. But that rapidly became questions about water intrusion because of wind. It became focused on understanding how hail was impacting our world, and what could we do, again, economically to defend against hailstorms. And then finally fire, understanding that fire was a a very important element in our sort of portfolio of potential losses, if you will.
Through my experience in the building industry is that there's a lack of construction verification, and there's a lack of building code reinforcement. What's the spacing here? 2 foot. Why? And this is why at the edge, at the high turbulence zone, they put it further apart. Doesn't make sense, right? If they would have added a row here, just like what they did up there, you would have stayed.
How adequate are the codes and standards? How adequate are the test methods that we have? And what I really see the laboratory as being is a mirror that we hold up to the industry that tries to reflect reality as best we can possibly recreate it in a laboratory setting.
Storm after storm, the stark reality was that many homes were lacking the ability to withstand the power of Mother Nature. The hope was for the Fortified program to challenge that reality.
The initial concepts for the Fortified program that began before I actually joined IBHS were to try to create the ideal house that an insurance company would want to insure.
What Fortified does is it helps builders, whether they're on the residential side or on the commercial side, it helps them make informed decisions that their customers are relying on them to make. And they could be a little bit more knowledgeable about how they can assemble pieces into a system that can be more durable and really deliver on the promise of what it is to build somebody's home.
It's a problem that touches everyone in the nation. It's a problem that is already built, right? So our problem is to sort of fix what's already there. That's difficult.
How do we take that same practice and make it the default for retrofits? So that we're not just talking about new construction, we're talking about how we bend down that risk curve for homes across America.
In October of 2010, IBHS was set to conduct their first full-scale wind demonstration comparing 2 homes side by side. The first home would be built using Fortified standards. The second home was constructed to conventional building codes.
Hey Thomas, good afternoon. We are in South Carolina in this massive 6-story weather lab, a huge test chamber, and behind me 2 homes that are built as if they were from the Midwest on those types of specs, 3-bedroom homes. Watch what happens when they kick on the wind and the rain.
We had done the math, we had estimated what we thought was going to happen. We thought that the building was going to be severely damaged, but we could still use it.
We had cranked the winds up, and things were, we lost a few shingles here, we've lost a little bit of siding, and we're kind of saying, we spent $40 million and this is the most we can do. And then the door pops open, and suddenly, and 3 seconds later, the house is gone.
Within seconds of being exposed to typical severe thunderstorm conditions, the conventional home was reduced to rubble. The Fortified home was able to withstand the wind speeds and remain intact.
I said some bad words. It was incredible. It was wow.
To me, it was, wow, you can't say this any simpler, right, than to demonstrate with a wind that would be typically seen in a thunderstorm, and demonstrate how easily it had destroyed a building.
Letters for days, emails for days. Wow, this, I knew the facility was going to be something, but I didn't know it was going to be like that. Just kicked it off with a bang. We couldn't have predicted that. It was fascinating, and yet that is the power of what happens in these storms. And so that experience just set the whole thing on a trajectory.
So the point is they got to build homes better, not just for Hurricane Alley, but for homes in the Midwest.
Yeah, we don't build to our natural disasters across this country. Fire, wind, hail, tornadoes, you name it. I mean, we need to build a better mousetrap. As more consumers become more and more aware that they really do need to make sure that their properties are built very strong to withstand these storms that we're seeing more of, I think they'll want to turn to a credible third-party source that has the interest of consumers at heart.
Following the successful demo, FEMA adopted IBHS's Fortified standard into its wind retrofit mitigation guide. One wind wasn't enough to stop. The team continued to push the limits of the research center to learn how else they could battle Mother Nature.
One of the first things we did when I got to IBHS was we held a meeting with the leadership of the fire services community, federal and state and local level. And they actually raised the issue of wildfire as something that was a growing threat because the WUI was being so aggressively developed. And it was an area where we thought we could be useful. Every meeting we went to after that, people started talking about Dr. Steve Quarles. Have you met Dr. Quarles? Have you asked Dr. Quarles? Dr. Quarles, Steve knows the answer to this or that. And so we kept saying, who is this guy? Who is this Dr. Quarles? And then we met him, and obviously we were very impressed. And so we hired him and basically said, Steve, run with it. And he and a guy named Jack Cohen from the Fire Services lab in Missoula, Montana, really designed the program for us.
I think our vision 10 years ago, I think it's sort of similar to what it is today. Our goal was to conduct some science-based research that would allow us to provide guidance and actionable things that a homeowner could do, that a business owner could do, and provide the same kind of information to standards writing organizations and building code organizations.
Over the years, we've been able to show people the importance of how quickly a fire can grow to other features of the home. We've been able to successfully point to the importance of deck performance and how we have been instrumental in the way people think about ember exposure and how they affect building ignitions.
One of the first ember demonstrations where the house burned, and it was quite impactful. Quite impactful for my assistant, because I'll never forget, she called me up and I said, how was the demonstration? I wasn't able to be there. I was so scared. That was the scariest thing I've ever witnessed. And it wasn't like she was in the lab, she was behind the glass, but she was still, she said that was the most frightening thing I've ever saw in my life. And to me, that spoke to the, number one, it was realistic. Number two, it was visually impactful. Number three, it was memorable. And I thought we're making progress if that's the reaction we're getting.
Just in the last couple of years, the wildfire threat, particularly in the West, has just increased exponentially. And so that has absolutely affected our research program here. There is an absolute compelling need, there's a societal need to be able to answer this peril with knowledge and information so that we'll go in the right direction when we're making policy, when we as Americans are choosing what it is that we're going to be doing. And so we are absolutely running into that gap to fill it with information.
When we talk about wildfire problem, we are talking about the combined problem. So for example, in a hurricane, the major driving factor based on the region is wind. How intense is the wind? That is only one parameter in wildfire. In addition to that, we have fuel, and that defines exposure on the building. And that is the difficulty or the complexity in wildfire research, that we have not been able to define exposure, heat exposure on the building. And that changes over time. We all know that that depends on fuel management, but like how that fuel management changes over time is one issue that, in my opinion, human cannot keep track of if you want to define that exposure. And that's where I think machine learning and machine vision can come and play an important role here. These tools are more efficient, they're more accurate, it's less time consuming for a drone to fly and collect data, and then we can model that.
A unique piece of what IBHS brings to the table through our research center is the physical science that complements what goes on in the big black boxes. There's a lot of advances that are playing on in data science, AI elements and machine learning, and we play a role to support that. But we have a unique ability to, whether it's feeding elements to modelers or to member companies or to other people who use data, to answer fundamental questions about the physics of what's going on.
Since the beginning, studies in the field have had an important relationship with the work that happens in the lab. Together, they have developed our understanding of these natural hazards and how we can fight them with science, stronger materials, and better building methods.
One of the properties that we wanted to understand about hailstones was their strength, because we kept reading the literature and everybody refers to hailstones as hard, soft, slushy. That's it. You would never find any data. You'd never know what that was. But we had a hypothesis early on that that would affect the amount of damage and the kind of damage that we produced. But again, we had no way to measure that, no way to try to replicate it in the lab. One of our old engineers actually kind of came up with the concept of, could we take a hailstone and break it or crush it and figure out how much force it took to crush it, and could that be used as a way to represent the strength and give us a sense that harder hailstones likely took more force to crush. And that was really the genesis of trying to capture that piece of information. Then we just had to develop a device that would give us the capability to do that.
IBHS was the first group to quantify the strength of hail, but more challenges were still ahead.
We would try our best using kind of crude measurements with a caliper to get 3 different dimensions, but it still ultimately results in you making an assumption that you have a spheroidal or ellipsoidal kind of hailstone, which we know is not true. I mean, you've all seen very big, jagged hailstones that definitely aren't round or like an oval. So we knew that we needed to take another step forward in trying to get that piece of information. And at this point, we still didn't really know which key piece of the hailstone characteristic actually impacted damage. So we went down the route of trying to get a 3D scanner. That would give us a very accurate volume, so we could calculate that density out. It also gave us a way to start to account for the shape.
3D scanning opened new avenues of science to understand hail, including 3D printing, and over the next 10 years, it will continue to be an influential piece in advancing our studies.
I don't know if we'll end up branching off at some point and not doing strictly spherical hail research, you know, with the bullets and the interesting shapes that you have from stones. Will we advance with that? You know, there's a lot there, and seeing which direction and where we go first.
The IBHS Hail Field Program was created to fill the question gaps surrounding test methods, understanding characteristics of hail, and how that affected the damage communities experienced.
When you've got this chance to collect data, you want to collect data across the entire swath of the storm. You don't want to get cut halfway and have to turn back. You want to get everything. You want to get on the one side of the swath where there is no hail, where there's more, where there's a maximum amount, and then on the other side where there's no more hail. So you've got the entire swath covered, and perhaps then some.
Our project is the only near continuous running field program, academic or otherwise, that's solely dedicated to hail. Part of our mission was to actually drive awareness of this particular peril.
I think it's important to get the message out that, you know, there is a significant impact happening here, and that research is critical to reducing those losses, to moving things forward.
If we can figure out a way to influence or mitigate our exposure to loss over time by either educating consumers so that they become more proactive. If you consider the fact that consumers have access to product safety ratings on a number of different things in their home, yet they don't understand some of the materials and the quality of materials that go into their own home.
Perfecting our asphalt shingle testing on different roofing products took IBHS and the insurance industry a step beyond in 2019. It was a key to unlocking change in the marketplace and reaching a goal of simplifying our message to educate consumers.
The hail standard is the result of 9+ years worth of dedicated work on this campus and work we did out in the field. And it gave us an opportunity to solve for something and fill a gap that no one else in the industry or the scientific community was doing. What's so spectacular about the hail standard and the work we did on impact-resistant asphalt shingles was the move that says we're going to shape the marketplace so that when a consumer buys a product that asserts a level of resistance or resilience, that it lives up to its moniker. It lives up to that label. That is really the core part of when research has come to life and is actionable to the point by which folks now experience less loss because of the science that has been done here.
IBHS, we've come out with a program called Fortified. There's a bronze program. The bronze program concentrates on the roof coverings. And so we've looked at taping the roofs, the seams on the roof deck. And maybe that's about $500 to $1,000.
property loss mitigation is not necessarily a major investment. For $500 to $1,000, a consumer can protect his or her property. This is extremely important to a consumer in a wind zone that has an extremely large deductible.
Through testing and research, IBHS and the insurance industry have been successful in getting people to focus on their roof through Fortified. The program now designates more homes in a month than it used to in a year.
Some states are definitely naming Fortified right in their statutes, like Alabama, and Alabama's leading the way. So I think as the mitigation plans at the state level come into play as a result of federal legislation, the grant programs that are under development in the states become, very much focused on providing grants for Fortified. Pretty soon there will be enough Fortified grants out there that there will be more demand, and the builders, I think, will come along to understanding that the Fortified standards should be part of the building codes.
Resilience, really across the board, it's a marathon. It's a game where you really have to think about what can I do in the short term to increase my long-term benefit. And one of the things that we've seen is innovative problem solving going on, particularly with somebody like NCIUA. So they've come up with a roof grant program explicitly designed to get people to make a decision today when there's no storm that has driven that desire. It's just normal replacement. But they're making that decision now to fortify their roof, and the reason NCIUA did that is so that they could reap the longer-term benefits.
Thanks to the success we've seen in Alabama and other states, to companies who believed in the mission, and to over 10 years of hard work from IBHS and the insurance industry, Fortified sealed roof deck will be adopted by both the International Residential Code and the Florida Building Code in 2021.
It's easy to get impatient with the way that the results of this facility roll out and get into the building code. And the long road that it took to get there is something that most people don't realize. Codes are on either a 3 or a 6 year cycle. So you put your proposal in, talk about it with builders, with contractors, with people who manufacture building products, and most of them are like, I don't know, prove it to me. Most of the things that we submit to the building code fail the first time around because people are just not sure about it. And then we come a second cycle. So now you're talking about 3 times 2 or 6 times 2 and to get enough votes to win the day. So it's a lengthy process from, I know I can do something about it, let's show the compelling research, let's get the right alliances in the codes or the standards and move it forward. But the progress is starting to stack up, and that process is getting a little easier for us. Most of the National Association of Home Builders, most of the contractors, people who manufacture materials, they know who we are and they know what we're bringing. And so sealed roof deck, for example, went through in the first cycle. We didn't have to go 2 cycles. So I have hope that that's a trend for the future as we are recognized as a scientific entity bringing facts to the table.
I actually came up from a legislative regulatory affairs type of role, and I know how hard it is to get building codes passed. And so to the extent that I see this real momentum right now in IBHS's voice coming out, whether it be at the committee hearings for the new codes under development, or it be with the work with the trade associations at the federal and state level, that to me is really, really exciting.
We need to make resilience a societal value in a way that comes with financial incentives so that resilience is sticky. We need to incentivize good behavior, good building practices, and we need to disincentivize risky behavior and vulnerable building practices. And IBHS will be at the center of that battle for a very long time to come.
Going through the meetings with the members as we were developing the ideas and the concepts for the facility, one of the things that they really felt strongly about was that the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety made a big difference once the videos got out there that showed the difference in performance of vehicles. And we needed that same ability in the building construction area and houses and commercial buildings to be able to show performance and to show the difference in performance, and we're getting there.
As I look forward over this next decade, the real opportunity is how do we build on the successes? The work we've done in hail is great. The work we've done on wildfire and wind is essential. But when I look at the environment where we can have the biggest impact, it's the wind performance of asphalt shingles. And not just out of the package and wrapping, but what does it look like at the 5-year and 10-year and 15-year mark?
IBHS is going to be looked on 20 years from now as the institution that made big change in how people understand and protect themselves from natural disasters.
And as you think about the loss of life and property, had this been a real event with people inside the home that was destroyed, you can also understand the importance of research as a complement to communications in order to get people to pay attention, change their attitudes, and ultimately demand safer and stronger building.